The Nevada desert sun scorched Red Hollow until it was dry and cracked, turning what was once a thriving town into a place of dust, despair, and simmering violence. In the suffocating heat, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, astride a black horse as dark as night. The man wore a dark coat, a revolver hanging low at his side, his eyes cold, the eyes of someone long accustomed to blood and loss. His arrival brought Red Hollow's sluggish rhythm to a halt. People paused in their work, silently tracking his every step, sensing a storm about to break. Inside Finnegan's store, Gideon Cole introduced himself as someone merely passing through, but his calm and dangerous presence was impossible to hide. A gleaming silver coin placed on the worn wooden counter made it clear he was no ordinary drifter. Across the street, Sheriff Harlow watched with suspicion. The instincts of a man who lived by power told him this stranger carried trouble with him. Gideon made no threats, raised no voice, yet his silence weighed like a declaration of war. From that moment on, Red Hollow understood one thing: the past never truly dies, it only comes back to collect a debt buried for years. At Martha O'Connor's rundown boarding house, Gideon Cole did not rush to rest. He had come to Red Hollow with a clear purpose, and the name he was searching for quickly shattered the town's fragile, fabricated calm. When Gideon quietly asked about Elijah Cross, the air grew heavy at once. Martha froze, her eyes sharpening with caution, as if merely speaking that name was enough to invite disaster to her door. Elijah Cross was more than a wealthy man. He controlled the mines, the water supply, the land, and even the law of Red Hollow itself. With Sheriff Harlow in his pocket, Cross had become untouchable. Anyone who ever dared to ask questions simply vanished, leaving behind a low, constant fear that smothered the town. Gideon made no effort to hide his intentions. When warned that Cross was a man no one could lay a hand on, he replied calmly that he was there for unfinished business. That cold composure made Martha understand that the man before her was not a reckless drifter, but someone who had already accepted the price he might have to pay. The news reached Sheriff Harlow quickly. He came to the boarding house himself, carrying his familiar threats. But when Gideon coolly asked him to deliver a message that Gideon Cole had returned, the color drained from the sheriff's face. That name did not just summon a ghost from the past. It signaled that Elijah Cross's grip on power was about to be challenged for the first time. Night fell over Red Hollow in a heavy silence, broken only by the flicker of oil lamps casting long shadows across empty streets. In a small room at Martha's boarding house, Gideon Cole stood by the window, staring out as if confronting his own past. 15 years had passed, yet the memory of that long-ago fire had never cooled. Martha came to him quietly. No longer the cautious innkeeper, she spoke with understanding and a deep, private sorrow. She told him about a man who had once dared to stand up to Elijah Cross, Joseph Cole, a man stripped of his land, whose ranch was burned and livestock slaughtered simply for refusing to submit. When Martha paused, Gideon confirmed what she had long suspected. Joseph Cole was his father. Gideon recounted that fateful night in a low, steady voice. He had heard his mother's screams, seen the flames devour their home, and been left amid the ashes with everything he had ever called family. Cross believed he had died in that inferno, but Gideon survived, carrying with him a vow to return. Martha warned that Cross was more powerful now than ever, with hired guns, the law, and the town itself under his control. Gideon did not waver. He had not come back for desperate revenge, but to end a fear that had lasted far too long. That night, Red Hollow was not only facing its past, it was standing on the brink of a quiet, inevitable reckoning. As dawn brushed against Red Hollow, Gideon Cole slipped out of town in silence, carrying a resolve heavier than his pack. Martha's warning echoed in his mind. Elijah Cross could not be defeated by brute force alone. To reach him, Gideon would need another path and someone willing to help him walk it. Following Martha's directions, Gideon sought out the ranch of Isaac Ward, an old but unyielding man who had once known his father. The moment Gideon appeared, Ward raised his gun in wary defense until the name Joseph Cole was spoken. Shock gave way to an old pain that had never healed. Ward recounted the night the flames consumed the Cole ranch. He had witnessed it all, but arrived too late to save anyone. Their conversation became more than remembrance. It was a bond between men marked by the same scar. Ward admitted that Cross ruled Red Hollow through fear, and that no one had ever dared face him head-on. But he also revealed something crucial. Elijah Cross had a single weakness: his daughter, Emma. Emma was nothing like her father. She despised brutality, trapped between her family's crimes and her own conscience. Ward believed that if anyone could bring Emma to the side of justice, it would be Gideon, the man who carried the true story of who Cross really was. Gideon hesitated, unwilling to drag an innocent person into his war. Yet he understood. To end Cross's reign, he would need allies, and Emma might be the only key. Night cloaked Red Hollow as Gideon Cole returned to town, each step carrying him closer to Elijah Cross's mansion atop the hill. The massive house loomed like a monument to power and fear, guarded tightly by loyal gunmen. Gideon did not approach the front gate. He melted into the darkness, waited with patience, then silently slipped through a half-open window, crossing into a place that had swallowed countless lives. Inside the cold, lavish mansion, Gideon came face to face with Emma Cross. She was no monster. Emma appeared tense and wary, her eyes heavy with the exhaustion of someone who had lived too long in her father's shadow. Gideon did not threaten her. Instead, he told her the truth about the fire long ago, about a family destroyed and a town crushed under fear. He made it clear he had not come to kill, but to end a cycle of violence. Emma was torn between blood and conscience. She already knew who her father was and what he had done, but no one had ever stood before her, offering another path. In the end, Emma made her own choice. She opened a hidden safe and handed Gideon a ledger containing proof of all of Elijah Cross's crimes pages that could bring down an entire empire built on fear. No sooner had Emma made her decision than danger closed in. Urgent footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by a tense, suffocating silence inside the room. The door burst open. Elijah Cross stood there with Sheriff Harlow, their eyes burning with rage and contempt. Before them, Gideon stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the threat, the ledger of crimes firmly in his hands. Elijah Cross made no effort to hide his fury when he realized his daughter had betrayed him. To Cross, this was more than defiance. It was a direct strike at the power he had spent years building. He called Gideon a ghost from the past, a man who should have died in the fire long ago. Gideon did not retreat. He declared that Cross's reign was coming to an end, and that Red Hollow would no longer bow to fear. Though trembling, Emma stood beside Gideon. For the first time, she faced her father not with fear, but with resistance. Cross ordered Harlow to arrest them both, convinced that the violence and authority he relied on would still be enough to crush any opposition. Then came the sound of explosions and shouts from outside. Townspeople had gathered, carrying torches and guns, shattering a wall of silence that had held for years. Gideon knew Cross was losing control. What began as a confrontation in a single room was no longer a private matter. It was the spark of an uprising. For the first time, Red Hollow dared to rise against the man once thought untouchable. The tension in the room reached its breaking point when Elijah Cross drew his gun, his eyes cold and desperate. He believed that a single shot could force everything back into the old order: fear, silence, and absolute control. Gideon stood his ground, ready to face the consequences, refusing to step back. He knew this moment would decide not only his fate, but the fate of all Red Hollow. Emma trembled as she watched her father aim the weapon at Gideon. In that instant, all hesitation vanished. She understood that if she stayed silent one more time, the town would remain forever bound in darkness. A gunshot tore through the stifling air. Elijah Cross collapsed, wounded but still alive. The shot was not meant to kill. It was a final declaration that his reign of brutality was over. In the chaos that followed, Gideon seized the moment. He and Emma escaped the room with the ledger of evidence in hand. Outside, the townspeople had gathered, torches blazing, their light reflecting off faces that had once been lowered in fear. For the first time, Red Hollow stood united. Emma's shot did more than save Gideon, it awakened an entire town. If you want to know what happens next when fear is shattered and justice begins to rise, keep following the story. Don't forget to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the final chapter of Red Hollow. Before the cheers could even fade, a violent orange glow erupted from the hill. Elijah Cross's mansion was burning. Flames devoured the walls that had long stood as symbols of power and oppression, as if Cross would rather see everything reduced to ash than accept defeat. Black smoke rolled into the night sky, casting a shadow of dread over Red Hollow. As the town stood stunned, grim news spread quickly. Elijah Cross was still trapped inside. Emma froze. Even after standing against her father, she could not bring herself to watch him die in the fire. Gideon did not hesitate. To him, justice was not revenge, and it was not death as an escape from responsibility. Ignoring the heat and choking smoke, Gideon charged into the collapsing house. Every step was a battle against fire and memory. He found Cross in despair, wounded, bitter, and ready to let the flames end everything in the most cowardly way possible. Gideon dragged him out, despite Cross's weak resistance and final curses. When Cross collapsed before the eyes of the townspeople, the power he had held for so many years fell with him. The mansion burned fiercely behind them, no longer a symbol of fear, but a full stop at the end of a dark era. Red Hollow stood silent not in terror, but in the realization that the darkness had finally been burned away. As the flames on the hill slowly died out, Red Hollow fell into a silence unlike any it had known before. Elijah Cross lay bound and motionless beneath the gaze of people who had once lived under his rule. For the first time in years, no one lowered their eyes. There was no fear, no avoidance, only the naked truth laid bare in the center of the town. The ledger of evidence was presented to the crowd. Its pages recorded every stolen parcel of land, every bribe paid, every life destroyed. Sheriff Harlow looked around and realized that Cross's power had shattered. Faced with the town's unity, he was forced to lower his gun and order his men to stand down. The law he had twisted for so long now turned back to bind the man who had manipulated it. Dawn rose slowly, washing Red Hollow in soft shades of pink and gold. The townspeople gathered along the main street, exhausted but changed, their eyes no longer filled with resignation, but with cautious hope. Cross was escorted out of town to await trial, carrying with him the complete collapse of a reign built on fear. In that moment, Gideon stood in Red Hollow, no longer as an outsider. He had not only brought down one man, but helped an entire town stand upright again. This dawn did not merely mark a new day, it signaled the beginning of a life in which Red Hollow would finally decide its own fate. As time passed, Red Hollow slowly rose from what had once been destroyed. Doors that had stayed shut in fear now opened every morning, and voices and laughter returned to streets that had long been silent. Elijah Cross became nothing more than a name from the past, while the town began learning how to live without bowing to anyone. Gideon Cole faced a familiar choice: to leave the way he had arrived, a drifter who had finished his task. But Red Hollow no longer saw him as an outsider. The townspeople asked him to stay and take on the sheriff's badge, not for power, but for trust. After a moment's hesitation, Gideon accepted. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a future not defined solely by the past. Emma Cross chose a path of atonement. She transformed the old mansion, once a symbol of oppression, into a school for the children of the region. Every laugh echoing within those walls became a step toward healing, for both her and the town. Emma was no longer defined by the name Cross, but by what she chose to build. In the calm of quiet afternoons, Gideon came to understand that home is not where one is born, nor where pain is buried. Home is where people stand together after the storm. Red Hollow, once the starting point of his loss, had become the place where he belonged, a community mended by justice, courage, and hope for the days ahead.